Week 1 of the 2021 college football season is finally here, and what a bunch of great games we have to begin the 2021 season. We've got Alabama and Miami. We've got some great Big Ten matchups this week. We've got a matchup between Georgia and Clemson, a top 5 matchup. Not only does that have college football playoff implications right off the bat, but this is a game that has a national championship game feel to it. So without further ado, let's get to the week 1 college football predictions. The offseason has been long enough. I'm not going to keep waiting any longer, so let's get right into it. The first of 2 Thursday night games on the prediction slate this week, Boise State and UCF. A battle between 2 of the most successful group of 5 programs that we have seen, but it's going to have a different feel to it. Boise State first-year head coach Andy Avalos, the former Oregon defensive coordinator, and UCF, the first game for new head coach Gus Malzahn, the former Auburn head coach who was fired at the end of last season. But another thing to add about this matchup, I do like the quarterback matchup to this. You've got Hank Bachmeier for Boise State, who became a household name after his performance against Florida State in his college football debut, and for UCF, Dillon Gabriel, who was second in the FBS last year in passing yards among the quarterbacks that are returning for the 2021 season, only behind North Carolina quarterback Sam Howell. And Sam Howell is one of the early Heisman favorites coming into the season, so that is just showing how good Dillon Gabriel really is. I'm interested to see if Andy Avalos can use that experience being the Oregon defensive coordinator, as Oregon became one of the best defenses in college football with Andy Avalos as defensive coordinator. Can he take his experience and dial up ways to stop this UCF offense that was second in the nation last year in total offense, only behind Kent State, who only played 4 games last season? And with UCF being second total offense last season, they were up there as far as the greats in college football. I mean, Clemson, Oklahoma, they were in the top 11 in total offense. Alabama, Ohio State, North Carolina, BYU. So they were pretty up there as far as against those great teams in college football. And I know BYU isn't really the great team compared to Alabama and Ohio State, Florida, and Clemson, Oklahoma, as far as those blue blood programs, but still, that just shows how talented this UCF offense actually is. And I think UCF does win this game. I just think that with Gus Malzahn at least having some actual head coaching experience compared to Andy Avalos, this is his first game as an actual head coach, while Gus Malzahn has had experience being a head coach. So I think that UCF does win this game. Plus, they will have home field advantage, which I think home field advantage is going to be more valuable than it has been in that we've ever seen, really. At least for the first couple of weeks in the season, home field advantage is going to have a lot of value to it. So I'm going to go with UCF. I think that UCF wins this game by at least 14 points. I just think the offense is that talented enough to win by at least 14. The second of 2 Thursday night games on the prediction slate this week, Ohio State and Minnesota. Could this be a trap game for the Buckeyes right off the bat? Because there always seems to be a game every season where Ohio State just doesn't look prepared for. And either they really get better the further on the game goes, or they lose that game and lose it in dominant fashion. I mean, we've seen it against Iowa, Purdue. I'll even say we saw it against TCU a few years ago and against Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game last season. Because Ohio State, they really struggled in probably the first 3 quarters of the Big Ten championship game last season. And Minnesota, they return quarterback Tanner Morgan, who I think is the most underrated quarterback in college football. And Minnesota also returns Muhammad Ibrahim, who ran for 15 touchdowns for the Golden Gophers last season. So I think asserting the running game for Minnesota is what's going to give them a chance to win this game, to put some pressure on Ohio State. Assert the running game, extend drives, keep Ohio State's defense on the field, keep them exhausted. Because if Minnesota can be within 7 at the beginning of the fourth quarter, I'm sure PJ Fleck would sign up for that 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I think if that happens, I could like Minnesota's chances, because if you're only going into the fourth quarter down by 7, that's a confidence booster for Minnesota. And this is the first game for quarterback C.J. Stroud, and could the pressure get to him? This is going to be his first college football game, and it's on the road, where I think home field advantage, as I said earlier in the video, where it's going to mean a lot more than what we've had in recent memory. Because a lot of teams last year, there were some that played in front of no fans. There were some that played in front of limited fans. And we're back to 100% capacity. So if you're Minnesota, this is the ideal time to play Ohio State. Because Ohio State, they could be looking ahead to Oregon next week. However, Ohio State, they have one of the best defensive lines and one of the best receiving cores in all of college football. But this game does remind me a little bit of their opener against Indiana a few years ago, when they were supposed to play Oklahoma the next week, and they struggled in the beginning of that game. And they got better the further on the game went. And I think that can be one of those types of games as well, where we see Ohio State struggle early on. Maybe they're down 10-7 at some point in the game. And the further on the game goes, the better we're going to see Ohio State get. And then Ohio State would win 45-13 or 45-17. They win in dominant fashion. I think that's going to be another one of those games. I think Ohio State wins this game big. But I think Minnesota, they could have a strong chance in this game if they can play clean football and assert the running game of Muhammad Ibrahim. Because Minnesota, they were in the top 5 last season as far as time of possession. But I do think Ohio State does dominate this game, although they might struggle in the beginning. Now we're on to the Saturday games. A great Big Ten matchup. Penn State and Wisconsin. I can't wait for this game. I think this is going to be one of those matches where we're going to see a lot of running the football. As Wisconsin, they were number 1 in college football last season in time of possession, while Penn State was 9th. So these are two teams that really know how to play disciplined football, that can keep possession of the football. But when we look at last season, because unfortunately we don't really have much to go off of this season, but I think Penn State is going to be much improved this season. I mean, they lost their opener against Indiana, and I think that really was a confidence shaker for Penn State, because I feel like if they would have won that game against Indiana, I think they would have performed a lot better as far as the whole season was concerned, because I think that could have been a confidence breaker for them to lose the way that they did, where Penn State, they allowed Indiana to force overtime in that matchup. And this is a tough game to pick, but I am going to pick Penn State to pull off the road upset. I just think that there is some confidence with Penn State this season. Penn State is still worthy of being a top 25 team. I just think that after last year, I think they're going to come out and be much better this season. Plus, Wisconsin, I'm not really sure what to think of Wisconsin at this point. I know they're always going to have a great running game, but do they have the better quarterback play? I just think Sean Clifford is going to be much better as far as if it comes down to quarterback play. So I'm going to pick the Nittany Lions to pull off the upset. Next, we have Alabama and Miami. Can Miami pull off the upset? If there was a season where the U could truly be back, it would be this season out of all years, because we see it every year with Miami. We've seen it at least in the past maybe 3-4 seasons, where they always say the U is back, but then when they play a tough opponent, they get blown out. And your biggest fear is, if you're a fan of Miami, this would be it. To play a tough opponent, to play the defending champions in the Alabama Crimson Tide. But there is some confidence though to Miami. D'Eriq King is back for another season, and he should be 100% healthy if he is not already, after suffering a devastating ACL injury in the bowl game last season. But Alabama, are they in rebuild mode? Because Alabama usually reloads instead of rebuild. But not a lot of returning starters on offense for the Crimson Tide last season, which ranked 4th in total offense. But Alabama, I believe, returns 8 defensive starters from last year's national championship team. Alabama did struggle on defense in the early portions of the season last year, but the defense got better the further on the season went. Meanwhile, for Miami, 11 returning offensive starters, which is huge to go into a game like this, in this magnitude. But the big question is, can Miami's defense keep the Hurricanes in this game? Can the defense force some early turnovers to establish some momentum? I'd say get a turnover in the first quarter to really establish some momentum. When you're an underdog like Miami in this matchup, your defense is what's going to get you some momentum. If they can just get some energy for the offense, give them a short field to play with. But at the end of the day, I think Alabama wins this game, but I think Miami might make this closer than what people think. If I had to guess, I would say Alabama wins by a score of 41-23. I think Miami's offense could put quite a significant amount of points on the scoreboard in this matchup. But I still think at the end of the day, the Tide rolls in this one on their title defense. Another great Big Ten matchup, Indiana and Iowa. Indiana, they were one of those teams in college football last season that just completely flew under the radar. Nobody expected Indiana to be as good as they were last season, and many suspect that Indiana could be that one team that could potentially dethrone Ohio State as far as the Big Ten champions are concerned. And I think I'm one of those people that think that Indiana could potentially dethrone Ohio State as Big Ten champions. But they got to get past Iowa first. A team that struggled at the beginning of last season. They lost their first 2 games. Then they just started winning games. After the first 2 games of the season, Iowa just got completely better. And they were a top 10 scoring defense in college football last season. While Indiana, I feel like, has one of the more underrated offenses in college football, led by Michael Penix. And I think that this matchup could potentially be one of the best matchups of the week. I think, despite Georgia and Clemson, which we're going to pick later on, this could, on the down low, be the best matchup of the week. But I am going to pick Indiana to win this game. I just think after last season, there is some confidence moving forward with this Hoosiers program, and with them returning 17 starters from last season, and after Iowa struggled last season, at least in the beginning, I think that Indiana will win this game. But I feel like whoever wins this game, they have the potential to be, at the very least, a 10-win team this season. I think that either of these both these teams, I think they have that potential. They have a high ceiling. Indiana's ceiling is a lot higher, but their expectations could be a lot high, might be a lot higher as well after last season by almost taking down Ohio State. But I think Indiana wins this week. Next, we have Louisiana and Texas, a matchup that 4 years ago I would have never guessed this would be a top 25 matchup. But here we are. Louisiana, they returned 20 starters from last season. And let's also not forget that Louisiana, they dominated against Iowa State last season. They moved the ball at will on that Cyclones defense. And Iowa State went on to be in the New Year's Six and beat Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. So this Louisiana team is not a team to take lightly if you're the Longhorns. The Longhorns, first game for new head coach Steve Sarkisian after firing Tom Herman at the end of last season. And Texas named Hudson Card the starting quarterback for this game. The Longhorns returned 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen from 2020. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Louisiana won this game. And in fact, I think they actually will win this game. I think they're going to win this game the same way they beat Iowa State last year. And that was running the football, controlling the game from start to finish, dictating the pace of it, especially with 10 returning offensive starters, including your quarterback, Levi Lois. He has got that really upperclassman experience level, senior leadership for that offense. I like Louisiana to win this game. I think it's going to be a score of 27-23. I just don't think they're going to necessarily dominate like they did Iowa State last season, but I still think Louisiana wins this game. And finally, the game of the week, the game you are all waiting for me to predict, Georgia and Clemson. What a way to start this college football season with a game of this magnitude. A game that has major college football playoff implications and a game that has a national championship game feel to it, as I said in the beginning. Wow, what a match. I still can't believe we're getting a game of this magnitude to begin the year. It's just super exciting. But for Clemson, first game post Trevor Lawrence, we saw starting quarterback DJ Uiagalelei perform in a couple of games last season against Boston College and Notre Dame, as Trevor Lawrence did have to miss 2 games last season. And for Georgia, do they finally have the answer at quarterback? Do they have the quarterback they need to propel them to winning a national championship in JT Daniels? Is he that guy that can finally lead the Bulldogs to a national championship? Now, the bad news for this game is that one of these two teams has to lose. And it's bad news because both these teams have college football playoff potential. But the good news is, whichever team loses, they still have a really good chance of making the college football playoff if they can run the table, which, based off of these two teams' schedules, I would say that whichever team lost, I still think they're in okay shape as far as making the college football playoff, because after this game, I'd say both their schedules look relatively easy. I would probably say there's more pressure on Georgia to win this game since they're in the more competitive conference, as Georgia still has to play Florida. They still have to play Auburn on the road, which could always be a trap game for anybody that plays there. While Clemson, their toughest game after this is probably the ACC championship game, which would probably be against North Carolina in all likelihood. So I would say there's more pressure on Georgia to win this game. But the way I see this game going, I think it's going to be a defensive battle, believe it or not. I just think that both these defenses, I think they can really hold their own. And it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a low-scoring game and if we got a defensive shootout. And by that I mean where these defenses are performing at the highest of their capabilities, and we see a low scoring game like 17-13. But I still think that Clemson has the better defense here. There is a little bit of questions as far as Georgia's defense is concerned, especially with the lack of experience in the secondary, which I think I think there's a matchup that could potentially be exploited there in that secondary, and it helps with Justin Ross returning for Clemson in 2021 after missing the entire 2020 season. But with Clemson returning 10 defensive starters from last season, I think I got to give the edge to Clemson here, and I think Clemson wins this game by a score of 27-21. I just think that we're going to see the defenses perform from start to finish, but I think once we get into that fourth quarter, we're going to see some points on the scoreboard, and Clemson wins 27-21. So those are my predictions for week 1 of the 2021 college football season. Comment your predictions down below, and as always, like, share, and subscribe. And if there is another game that you want me to predict, comment in the comment section. I will leave a prediction down below. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day. Until next time.